In 135 AD, a Roman slave stood in chains before his master, his leg deliberately broken as punishment. The master sneered, "You'll never walk properly again." The slave, Epictetus, looked up calmly and replied, "You have power over my leg. You have no power over my judgment." That moment of radical authenticity in the face of absolute powerlessness would birth a philosophy that 2,000 years later, neuroscience confirms as one of the most effective frameworks for psychological resilience ever conceived. Today, we're decoding exactly how Epictetus discovered the antidote to the most pervasive disease of modern consciousness, inauthenticity. This isn't about positive thinking or self-help platitudes. This is about a systematic method for reclaiming your internal authority that Epictetus taught in his school in Nicopolis, documented by his student Arian in the Discourses and the Enchiridion. What makes Epictetus uniquely powerful is that he didn't theorize from comfort. He built this system while surviving the worst conditions human beings can endure. He knew what it meant to have everything external stripped away, and in that stripping, he found something unbreakable. Before we break down this technique step by step, subscribe to this channel, where we decode ancient wisdom with scientific precision and practical application. New deep dives every week. Here's what most people misunderstand about inauthenticity. We think it's about lying to others, wearing masks, playing roles we don't believe in. That's the surface. Epictetus identified something far more insidious. We become inauthentic the moment we assign our sense of self to things outside our control. Every time you say, "I am successful," and mean, "I have money," you've handed your identity to market forces. Every time you say, "I am loved," and mean this person approves of me, you've given your core to someone else's changing opinion. This is what Epictetus called living in the externals. And it's not just philosophically problematic. Modern psychology confirms it's the primary mechanism of anxiety, depression, and identity fragmentation. Let's examine what Epictetus actually taught. In the opening line of the Enchiridion, he draws the most important distinction in all of Stoic philosophy. Some things are within our power, while others are not. This sounds simple. It's not. He's making a surgical cut through reality itself. Within our power, our judgments, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, essentially the movements of our own mind. Outside our body, our property, our reputation, our relationships, our circumstances, essentially everything else. Notice what he does not say. He doesn't say we can't influence externals. He doesn't say we shouldn't care about outcomes. He says we cannot control them. And the moment we base our identity, our worth, our authenticity on what we control, we become fragmented. We become whoever circumstances make us. Here's where it gets technical. What Epictetus discovered is what cognitive neuroscience now calls the locus of control. Internal locus of control, the belief that your core experience is determined by your internal responses, correlates with resilience, psychological health, and what researchers call authentic self-concept. External locus of control, the belief that your experience is determined by external circumstances, correlates with anxiety, depression, and what's clinically termed contingent self-worth. Epictetus didn't have fMRI machines, but he observed the same pattern. People who anchored identity in externals became psychological slaves. People who anchored identity in their own faculty of choice remained free regardless of circumstance. The practical application starts with what Epictetus called making proper use of impression. An impression is any thought, feeling, or perception that arises in consciousness. You see someone ignore you at a party. That's the raw impression. Immediately, your mind adds interpretation. They don't like me. I'm socially awkward. I'm unlikable. That's the judgment. Epictetus's technique is to catch the gap between impression and judgment. The impression itself is neither good nor bad. It's just data. The judgment is where you either maintain authenticity or surrender it. Here's the exact practice. When an impression arises, pause. Ask, is this within my control or outside it? If it's outside your control, their opinion, their behavior, the outcome, then practice the phrase Epictetus gave his students. This is nothing to me, not because you don't care about the person or the situation, but because you refuse to base your identity on what you cannot control. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, here's where most people completely misapply this teaching. They think Epictetus is advocating emotional suppression or cold detachment. They think this is nothing to me means I don't care about anything. That's the opposite of what he taught. Epictetus is saying, distinguish between what you can't, then invest your full authentic self in what you can control. Your integrity, your effort, your virtue, your choices, while holding externals lightly. This isn't detachment. This is proper attachment. You care deeply about being a good friend. You hold lightly whether that person reciprocates. You care deeply about doing excellent work. You hold lightly whether you get the promotion. The caring is authentic. The non-attachment to outcomes is what keeps you free. The neuroscience here is fascinating. When you practice this distinction consistently, you're literally rewiring your brain's threat detection system. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system, activates when it perceives threats to survival. But here's what researchers discovered. The amygdala can't distinguish between physical threats and threats to your self-concept. When someone criticizes you and you've based your identity on their approval, your brain processes that as a survival threat. You get the same cortisol spike, the same fight or flight activation, but when you've internalized Epictetus' distinction, when your identity is rooted in your own choices rather than others' opinions, criticism becomes just information. The amygdala doesn't activate because there's no threat to your core self. This is measurable. This is mechanic. Let's walk through the step-by-step application. Step 1. Identify where you've outsourced your authenticity. Make a list. Where do you feel anxious? Where do you feel you're performing rather than being? Where do you feel your worth is on trial? These are the areas where you've unconsciously based your identity on external. For most people, it's some combination of career success, physical appearance, others' approval, relationship status, financial security, social status. None of these are inherently bad. The problem is when you say I am these things rather than I have, or I'm working toward these things. Step 2. For each area, practice the Epictetan reframe. Instead of I am successful because I have this job, reframe to I am someone who brings excellence to my work, regardless of external recognition. Instead of I am attractive because people find me attractive, reframe to I am someone who takes care of my health and presents myself with dignity. Notice the shift. You're moving your identity, the outcome, to the process, from the external to the internal, from what you can't control to what you can. This isn't semantic games. This is relocating your sense of self to unassailable ground. Step 3. Practice the morning meditation Epictetus prescribed. He instructed his students to begin each day by contemplating, today I will encounter people who are meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, unsociable. This sounds pessimistic. It's not. It's preparation. He's saying external circumstances will not cooperate with your preferences. People will behave badly. Events will go wrong. If you've based your authenticity on everything going smoothly, you'll be shattered by noon. But if you've anchored yourself in your own responses, your patience, your integrity, your virtue, then you remain unshaken, regardless of what happens. You're not hoping for perfect circumstance. You're prepared to be authentically yourself in imperfect circumstances. Step 4. When you fail, you will fail. Practice what Epictetus called the discipline of ascent. You'll catch yourself basing your worth on externals. You'll notice you're anxious about outcomes you can't control. You'll realize you've been performing rather than being. That's power. Don't judge yourself for the inauthentic. That's just adding another layer of external judgment. Instead, simply return to the distinction. This is outside my control. My worth is not determined by this. I return to what I can control. My choices, my character, my responses. This return, practiced thousands of times, is what builds unshakable authenticity. Common mistake number 1. People think this practice makes you passive. They think if you stop caring about externals, you'll stop trying to achieve anything. Epictetus addressed this directly. He said, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." You still pursue goals. You still work toward outcomes. You still care about results. But your identity, your authenticity, your sense of self is not hostage to whether you achieve them. You can pursue a promotion with full effort while being completely at peace if you don't get it, because your worth isn't determined by the promotion. It's determined by whether you brought your best self to the pursuit. This is the paradigm. When you stop needing external validation, you often perform better because you're not paralyzed. Fear of failure. Common mistake number 2. Confusing Stoic practice with emotional suppression. Epictetus never said don't feel emotion. He said don't let emotions rooted in false judgments control you. If you're sad because someone you love is suffering, that's appropriate emotion rooted in love. If you're devastated because someone you barely know didn't like your social media post, that's disproportionate emotion rooted in outsourced identity. The practice isn't to feel nothing. It's to feel appropriately based on accurate judgments of what matters and what you can control. Common mistake number 3. Applying this practice to avoid responsibility. Some people use Stoicism as an excuse. Outside my control, so I don't need to try. That's not Stoicism. That's fatalism. Epictetus was clear. You are absolutely responsible for your effort, your integrity, your choices. What you're not responsible for is outcomes that depend on factors beyond you. You're responsible for studying thoroughly. You're not responsible for whether the test happens to cover the material you know best. You're responsible for being a loving partner. You're not responsible for whether that person chooses to stay. The distinction is crucial. Let's look at how Epictetus himself applied this. When his master broke his leg, he could have based his identity on his physical wholeness, his freedom, his circumstances. If he had, that moment would have shattered him. Instead, he anchored his identity in the one thing that couldn't be taken: his faculty of choice, his ability to judge rightly, his internal freedom. The leg was broken. That was control. His response to the broken leg, that was entirely within his control. And in that response, he remained authentically himself. Years later, when he gained his freedom and became one of Rome's most influential philosophers, he taught from that same principle. He never said the broken leg didn't matter. He said it didn't determine who he was. Here's a modern application to make this concrete. You're in a job where you're not getting recognition you believe you deserve. The inauthentic response, the one most people default to, is to either perform harder to get approval, becoming increasingly resentful, exhausted, or check out emotionally, becoming cynical and disengaged. Both responses have outsourced your authenticity to your boss's opinion. The Epictetan response: I am someone who brings excellence to my work because that's who I choose to be, regardless of recognition. The recognition is outside my control. My effort and integrity are within my control. I will do excellent work. If recognition comes, I'll receive it gratefully. If it doesn't come, my worth is unchanged because my worth was never based on recognition. From this place, you can make clear decisions. Maybe you stay and continue excellent work without resentment. Maybe you leave for an environment that aligns better with your values. You're not making decisions of wounded identity. You're making them authentic self-knowledge. Have you experienced this shift from external to internal validation? Drop your experience in comments below. Now here's where Epictetus's teaching becomes truly radical. He claimed that the person who masters this distinction, who fully internalizes that their authenticity is based solely on what they control, becomes invincible. Not physically invincible, psychologically invincible. He said, if you wish to be invincible, never enter a contest where victory is not up to you. This sounds like he's saying, avoid all challenge. He's saying the opposite. Enter every contest. Pursue every worthy goal, but never enter the contest of basing your worth on winning. The contest you can win, the only contest that matters, is the contest of being authentically yourself regardless of external outcome. Modern psychology has a term for what Epictetus described: unconditional self-regard. It's the strongest predictor of psychological resilience, authentic relationships, and sustained well-being. People with unconditional self-regard don't need to prove their worth because their worth isn't on trial. They don't need to perform because they're not seeing validation. They can be fully present because they're not monitoring how they're being perceived. This is what Epictetus meant by freedom. Not freedom from circumstance. He knew circumstances brutal. Freedom within any circumstance, because the core self is anchored, cannot be taken. The advanced practice Epictetus taught his most committed students was what he called voluntary discomfort. Deliberately practice going without things you depend on for identity. Fast occasionally if you've based identity on food or comfort. Dress simply if you've based identity on appearance. Spend time alone if you've based identity on social validation. The point isn't asceticism for its own sake. The point is to prove to yourself experientially that your authenticity, your worth, your core self exists independent of these externals. When you can be fully yourself while uncomfortable, while unimpressive, while unvalidated, that's when you know you've relocated your identity to unshakable ground. Here's what this looks like in the territory of relationships where inauthenticity is most painful. You meet someone you're attracted to. The inauthentic pattern: you perform. You monitor how you're being perceived. You calculate what to say to get approval. You're anxious. Why? Because you've unconsciously based your worth on whether them likes you. Their opinion has become the measure of your value. The Epictetan reframe: I am someone who shows up authentically in relationship. Whether this person reciprocates is outside my control. My authenticity, my kindness, my integrity, these are within my control. I will fully my. If that leads to connection, beautiful. If it doesn't, my worth is unchanged because my worth was never based on their response. From this place, you're actually more attractive because you're not needy, but more importantly, you're free. You can be rejected without being diminished because rejection is just information about compatibility, not a verdict on your worth. Let this integrate for a moment. So here's what Epictetus really discovered and what neuroscience is now confirming. Your authenticity isn't something you find or create. It's what remains when you stop basing your identity you cannot control. It's not an achievement. You were born with your faculty of choice, your ability to judge, your internal authority. Then society, trauma, conditioning taught you to outsource that authority to externals, to grades, to approval, to status, to outcome. Inauthenticity is the learned behavior. Authenticity is your natural state, accessed by systematically withdrawing your identity from externals and relocating it to what Epictetus called your ruling faculty, your capacity for reasoned choice. The blinding light Epictetus offers isn't comfortable. It reveals how much of what you call yourself is actually just accumulated opinions, borrowed values, and outsourced judgments. It shows you how much energy you spend maintaining a self-concept based on things you can't control. It exposes the exhausting performance you've been running. But on the other side of that revelation is something unbreakable, a self that exists independent of circumstances, a worth that cannot be diminished by external events, an authenticity that remains constant whether you're succeeding or failing, approved or rejected, comfortable or suffering. This is the Stoic promise, and it's not metaphorical. When you anchor your identity in your own choices rather than external outcomes, you become psychologically free. You can pursue goals without being enslaved by them. You can care about people without being controlled by it. You can experience failure without being defined by it. You can face suffering without being shattered by it. Not because you've become hard or detached, but because you've finally located your authentic self in the one place it can never be taken, your own faculty of. The practice is simple. The application is lifelong. Every day presents new opportunities to notice where you've outsourced your authenticity. Every interaction reveals where you're performing rather than being. Every setback shows where you've based your worth on outcomes you can't control. And every moment you catch yourself and return to the distinction, this is within my control, this is outside my control. You strengthen your authentic core. This isn't theory. This is applied philosophy. This is the systematic reclamation of your internal authority. Tonight, before you sleep, practice Epictetus's evening review. Ask yourself, where today did I base my worth on externals? Where did I perform rather than be authentic? Where did I let circumstances determine my sense of self? Don't judge these moments, just notice them. Then ask, where did I maintain my authenticity regardless of circumstances? Where did I choose my response rather than react? Where did I remain true to my values even when it was difficult? These moments, these are who you actually are. Everything else is just weather passing through. If this breakdown gave you clarity, subscribe to this channel for more technical deep dives into ancient wisdom and modern application. Hit that like button, drop your questions, experiences in the comments, and remember, this isn't theory. This is applied philosophy. Your consciousness is the laboratory. The experiment starts now.